And I've basically been putting the pieces together ever since. So I am going to share my screen. Let's see. All right. So my story, I have some pictures up here on the screen of my dad in these first two pictures. And growing up as a police officer's daughter was just normal to me. I was born into a family. My dad had already been a police officer for quite a long time. He had 37 and a half years on the job when he ended up passing away. So had a really nice long career, loved his job. And like I said, it was just normal for me. I never thought twice about the fact that my dad was a police officer. The only things that were different maybe from other kids were that we absolutely had to say goodbye, hug my dad, kiss him anytime he left for work, just in case. As all of you know, it's a dangerous job and he might not come home. Other things, you know, I would go to the bus stop, my dad would be coming home from the night shift, those types of things. But for the most part, I didn't feel any different. There was always this fear that dad had a dangerous job. But as a kid, you know, I didn't really pick up on many of those things. And my dad kept it pretty separate. So we knew he had a dangerous job, but to my sister and I, our perspective, he was just Batman. He worked in the night, saved people, fought the bad guys. We didn't know too much. And as I kind of grew up and got older and became a teenager and started to kind of realize that my dad was bringing a little bit of his trauma and just kind of the repercussions of that compounding stress home, but wasn't really talking about it to us. So we didn't really have a clear understanding of kind of these different changes in his personality when he was dad at home. And I'll give you a few examples of that just to try to connect the dots here for some of you. So he might come home from work one day and he's super excited, right? He's so hyped to see us. He wants to play in the backyard. I was a big athlete, so he and I really bonded over that. We would always play sports together. That would be great, right? Like that was my dad. There would be other days where he might come home and just kind of pass me in the hallway of our house and not say a word. And at that point, I would think to myself, gosh, did I say something wrong? Did I do something wrong? I never connected it to his job because like I said in the beginning, he was just Batman. I didn't know anything else about the job, right? And so that was really challenging for me personally as a child. And over the years, it kind of caught up to our relationship. We were very, very close. Still to this day, I love my dad, very great relationship. But I think it could have been stronger had we talked about a few of those things. So that's why I like to share my story, because I think that there are moments where he and I could have connected better and had an even stronger relationship and hopefully maybe even helped him cope with a lot of things, but we didn't talk about it. And he was definitely part of this generation of just push it down and don't speak about it. And I think a lot of that too was his fear of bringing all of that bad stuff to his little daughters, you know, and I think a lot of you probably can relate to that, but he was working narcotics and vice when I was a little girl. So how much of that can you possibly bring home when you're working undercover and seeing these awful things? So it's kind of this push pull, and I'll talk about that in another slide. But for my story, you know, it was kind of these little pieces that I was putting together over time that was kind of taking a toll on me, but also my relationship with my dad. It was very frustrating for me as I got older when I never knew who was coming through the door. I didn't know if, you know, it was going to be the excited, happy version of my dad, or if it was going to be someone who was just basically not there, like a skeleton of who he was, or if it was going to be someone angry. Sometimes he would come home from work and just the tiniest little thing would set him off and make him upset. An example of this is one time he came home and he was never like a neat freak or cared that much. As long as we did our chores and everything was fine, he would never get mad at that. And I just had one dish in the sink and it just set him off. And he was never frustrated by that. But I think he was anticipating my mom coming home and being upset about that. And he had a tough day at work. So it was all of these different things kind of put together. But at the moment, you're not thinking that, especially as a child. You're thinking, what the heck? Why is he so moody? Or, you know, what's his problem today? That sort of thing. So now fast forward and he becomes captain. So his his role changed. What he was doing at work changed. Now, instead of more of the, operational stressors, like responding to critical incidents and things like that, you would hear him talking with my mom about like organizational stressors, like politics within the department, or stressors about performance evaluations and who was getting promoted and things like that. And it just always seemed like he was so cynical toward this job, but he had loved this job. So it was super confusing again to myself, because here he is, my dad, right? My best friend in the world, coming home angry or upset after this job. And I'm like, why is he still doing this job? Right. I didn't understand it as a kid. And I think a lot of that is because we really didn't talk about it. And again, I want to kind of preference that I in no way am trying to say that people should talk about it in a certain way or have certain types of conversations. I think everyone is different. I think everyone's family is completely different. But there are things for me as a daughter, from my own perspective, that I think would have been really helpful and would have avoided a lot of just arguments. My dad and I, at the end of our relationship, unfortunately, he passed away again when I was 21. But in my later teenage years, I was kind of resentful about, now he wanted to be so involved in my life. And growing up, especially in like that middle school year, he was always at work, always working overtime, always on the job. Even when he wasn't on the job physically, he mentally just was always at work. And then he became a captain, and like I said, his role changed. It was very obvious that he could kind of take a breather in some ways. But I was resentful. I was kind of annoyed that, like, now you want to give me your time, or now it's okay to come home happy every day, but you didn't do that over those years. But again, I didn't really have an understanding of the job. I didn't know about trauma. I didn't know about compounding stress or any of these things. So I'm just sitting there as the daughter saying, what the heck? Like, why are you happy now? And what was that during my childhood that would make you so disconnected? And I'm connecting the dots now at 28. I'm a PhD student here at Chapman University and studying health communication. And my heart and soul is really in this mental health aspect, because I think there's so much to be said for hearing people's stories and speaking to people who actually go through it. I think from a research perspective, oftentimes we look at these statistics, right? Super high rates of suicide, depression, PTSD, all of these things. When you sit down and listen to these stories, it provides so much depth and nuance to what first responders actually go through and how we get to those statistics. So I've been doing research for the past 3 years on this, but it all comes from these experiences that I had as a daughter. He struggled so much and did it in these silent ways at home. And I think that he could have lived a much happier life if he had some of these conversations, or even had some of the tips that I'll talk about in a few other slides. But one story I will share with you, and this is a specific incident that I wanted to share with all of you. I think it kind of puts into perspective what I'm talking about when I say wasn't sure who was coming through the door. So my dad, like I said, had worked narcotics and vice undercover, and he worked in a pretty rough city. I was really privileged and really lucky to live in a really cute town in Connecticut, super safe, never worried about it, rode my bike up and down the street all the time, felt safe. My dad worked in a really bad city in the surrounding area, and so he saw life quite different. And he was always very, very protective, as any dad is, but then add on a police officer dad, you have extra protection. And, he didn't talk too much, like I said, about his job or even the area he worked in, because I think didn't want me to be nervous. But anyway, he would see these horrible things. And as I got older, I would see them in the newspaper or see them on the news. I would see my dad walking across the scene on the news. I don't know to this day what happened at this particular call or on scene, but he did come home. I must have been like 16 or 17, just kind of that snarky teenage girl age. And he came home and I said to him, where were you? Or you're late to pick me up, or something snarky. And he just lost it. He was throwing things, not physically violent with me, but definitely so agitated, and just couldn't stop for about a minute and a half, just throwing things and yelling. And I didn't understand it because it was like, we had those types of conversations. Every girl and their dad has those little banters back and forth. And he kind of snapped out of it after a minute and a half and just kind of looked at me with this like sense of shame and guilt. And like, oh my goodness, I can't believe that I just did that in front of my daughter. I can't believe I just did that. And that was really painful for me because I felt like I just wanted to hug him and say, it's okay. It's okay that, you lost it. It's okay that you're upset. But I think that whole persona of he's Batman and my dad fights crime in the night and he's this perfect guy was really hard for him to kind of be able to have a bad day or be able to take a few moments. And so that's kind of what I'll talk about today. And I'm so appreciative of all of your time and the fact that you are here, even just listening to me. And I just want to reiterate, a lot of this obviously is all guided by my personal relationship and what I went through as a daughter. But I know every relationship is different. So hopefully something here that I say will maybe be meaningful and helpful for you. I also want to note this other picture here on the screen. When I talk about some of the struggles of being the daughter of a police officer for these many years, I also always want to highlight I'm so proud and so privileged to be a part of a police family. This last picture, you'll see Yukon in the back. I went to the University of Connecticut, and my dad's last wish was to see me graduate from college. And he unfortunately passed away before I was able to do that. And I'm walking up to graduation and I'm super nervous. And there's so many people in Gamble Pavilion. And all of a sudden I feel someone's hand, excuse me. There we go, I had a tickle. I feel someone's hand on my shoulder, and it's all of my dad's closest friends from the police department. And they were there for me when I graduated. So being part of this family is such an honor, such a privilege. And so I always want to highlight that. I don't want this to be me talking about all the things that went wrong or that weren't great, because I do have such an incredible support system still to this day. They're so great to my mom and my sisters. So I'm so grateful for them. I wanted to give them a shout out, even though they're not here. But definitely, again, it's a huge part of who I am. It's guiding everything I want to do in the future. And so I wanted to kind of reiterate that as well. So kind of putting the pieces together, this is what I call it, right? So my dad passes away. I was in the middle of studying health communication. And I'm thinking, he went through all of this trauma. But I know that he didn't really talk about it. Like, I just know that about him. He just had that personality of like, I'm tough, I got this, no worries. But he suffered a lot. And I knew that based on the examples I was telling you about, right? I could pick up on the fact that he had this recliner chair, and Dr. Gil Martin talks about this in his book, and brilliant. And believe he calls it the magic chair. Basically, this chair in our living room that he would just sit in, turn on that TV, and just be a blank stare, whether it was sports or the History Channel, whatever he's watching. And he would just sit there until it was time for bed. And it would be really upsetting, right? As a child, to be like, wow, he's addicted to the TV or willing to sit there, but he doesn't want to go shoot hoops in the backyard today. Like, why? Why don't you want to spend time with me? Why are you just staring at the TV screen? Or if I was in the room with him, not sparking conversation, right? He's just staring at the screen. But I think that was his way. Now I'm putting the pieces together, his way of kind of trying to mask what he was going through, or just be able to come down from that hypervigilance roller coaster that I know a lot of you probably know about, right? That kind of at that super high coming down takes time, just physiologically, right? And so I'm putting the pieces together now, but as a kid, especially when you're younger, you're not putting those pieces together. You're taking it personal. And if you're anything like myself, you're kind of beating yourself up thinking, what did I do wrong? I know that was something that always kind of bothered me, is I would think, did I say the wrong thing? Or did I run up to him too fast? Or what was it? And so that was kind of the tension that was pulling on our relationship, was I was like, oh my goodness, I can't get it right. Why doesn't he want to spend time with me instead of being so disconnected? So I put up these two just kind of blocks of, if I had to organize my story into things and why I care so much about this and feel so passionately about sharing stories, is that shame and the guilt was such an incredible, tough time for my dad and for myself, because I was slowly starting to realize he's going through something terrible and feels really guilty about letting that kind of spill over. And that's kind of when your moments from work spill over into home or vice versa, right? You can be going through a lot of really tough things at home, and then those spill into your job as well. I often tell anyone who's not a first responder family member or, other academics in the field who don't work with first responders, they're human beings too. Like, they are humans with real life families and real life problems in addition to work stress. I think a lot of people just think about the critical incidents, but it's that compounding stress. And I think he always tried not to let it spill over, but it's so natural. And I don't think anyone really told him that or gave him kind of that validation that it's okay, that sometimes, just human nature, it's going to spill over, right? We're not perfect humans. None of us are. But I think that was really one of the most challenging things for us as a family, was trying so hard to disconnect those two things when really they are related, and it's okay. And another part of that was that guilt factor of letting my daughter see me upset, or letting my daughter think that I don't love my job, or, these types of things. And that guilt, I think, it came from that shame. It was kind of intertwined. And it was like these two aspects of his identity were colliding when really they're kind of both part of them. And so he had to shift between being Captain Craw at work and then coming home, taking that hat off and putting on the dad hat. And that's challenging. And that's not something a lot of other parents have to do, right? It's not the same as coming home from an office job and being mom or dad. And I think that recognition is so key, especially from a child's perspective. We get it, right? When you get older, our parents have a very tough, hard job, right? And so that shifting or colliding of those two pieces of identity can be really, really stressful. And I recognize that now, based on the last slide of putting these pieces together. But I think that was really one of the biggest challenges for him, was that he had this view that at home, he was supposed to be this perfect vision of having it all together, right? He had to have it all together on the job, especially when he was captain, he was leading a team. Now he's coming home, he needs to be the leader of our family, have everything together. And when it's not, it was just another stressor. And then I like to talk about this dialectical tension, because this is really, really hard, I think, for a lot of first responders, including my dad. This tension, or this pull, if you will, between I want to share and connect with my family, but I also want to protect them. And when I talk about communication and mental health, it's never this easy fix, right? Because especially with first responders, there's no one right way to do it. There's no one right way that your family is going to handle things. My mother was the daughter of a 40-year firefighter. So she had a background in first responder life. She grew up as a child of a first responder. So she got it. She knew what to expect. She knew that there were going to be these traumatic incidents or just prolonged stress that my dad would deal with. But there was a tension more so from how to talk to my kid about it. What do I share, right? Some of it, like I said, I would see it on the news, and then I would ask him questions. And I don't think he really knew how to share it with me. And I think, again, a lot of that came from when he started on the job, you didn't talk about anything. And so I think he just kind of carried that with him. And even when he was struggling then, he didn't know how to navigate. How much do I share without making my child feel really unsafe or nervous, or, bringing that trauma into the house? I often use that terminology. I feel like he tried not to bring the trauma in. And I think someone needed to validate or reassure him that it's not as easy as you think it is. It's not a suitcase that you can just leave in your car, but being able to navigate that. And a lot of the times when my dad did talk about work, or my parents would talk about it together, we would leave the table, they would go say, watch TV or something. Your dad and I are going to talk. So they had that great relationship, and I'm so appreciative of that. And my parents were happily married until the day my dad passed away. So incredible relationship, great role models. But again, I think it was just so tough for him to navigate, how much do I share without upsetting my children, without getting to the point where my kids can't cope or are so nervous when I leave the house that they're going to get hurt or that I'm going to get hurt. And that was really important for my dad, because who do you want to protect more than anyone in the world? Your family. And so now, again, I get that. But when you're a kid, you're thinking, oh my gosh, like he's so protective, right? Especially as a daughter, he won't let me do anything. This is the worst, that kind of thing. But now, you know, as I'm putting these pieces together, I can really sense and think back to times where he definitely was feeling this pull, this tension of, I want to feel connected to my kid, right? I really do want her to know that I go on these bad calls. She thinks I'm this cranky, cynical old man now, but I don't know how much to share without it kind of becoming this really traumatic experience for her. And so that I always want to talk about that dialectical tension, because that's a really challenging thing. And especially for first responders who want to protect their family so much, but also part of that connection, right? We ask you how your day is and you just say, it's fine. We know nothing about your job, but then you act like you're super upset. That's very confusing for kids. So the balance is so hard to find, so hard. And I recognize that obviously as a child of a first responder, I don't know how much I would have been able to take. Even that's hard. We would visit my dad at work and obviously learn about his job and see his friends and see his office, things like that. But that was kind of surface level. It really wasn't ever the stress. And I don't think he ever wanted us to experience that. And I totally understand it. But I think just even recognizing that there is this pull between wanting to share, wanting to connect, and wanting to protect. So when someone asks me what it was like growing up as a child of a first responder or what I learned, I have to say, these are the first things that come to mind. The absolute first is flexibility. I can't tell you how many times I was at a family party or maybe even Christmas morning and my dad's pager went off and he had to go to work. So you just become this very flexible person and you adapt really well to unknown and uncertain circumstances. You know, when COVID hit, I wasn't able to go home for the holidays. And I know that was really stressful for a lot of people to kind of mix things up and not be with their family in person or do it on Zoom or do it a different day. And this is just one silly example, but I was used to that. You know, we would have Christmas on the 29th if we had to. And so that flexibility, that ability to adapt and to not lose it when things don't go exactly as planned was definitely something that I learned being a child of a first responder. The second one is probably the most important to me to this day. And this is something that I carry with me every day. I have my dad's badge right on my desk. And I always think about him when I'm going through something stressful or see other people might not having the integrity that I wish they would have. And just a classic reminder of the privilege of being an officer's daughter is you learn the importance of integrity. And I carry that, like I said, with me every single day. And that was something that I learned just watching him on the job, the level of integrity he had and would talk about. These are the types of things he would talk about. And this is something I'm so grateful for because he really instilled a lot of what it means to be an officer in us as children because he wanted us to have these different qualities. I'll just point out this picture on the screen here is actually when we had his wake, we were bringing him to bury him and all the police lined up to say goodbye to him. So that's one of those photos that I really cherish. And the next one is compassion. It kind of goes along with that as well as respect, right? And that's kind of why I put this picture up here because people very much respected my dad, respected the type of leader he was, respected that he always did the job the best he could and protected people and followed the laws and did everything he was supposed to. And the other one is compassion. I think if nothing, being the child of a first responder teaches you compassion. Our parents literally save lives and dedicate their life to helping other people. It's impossible not to pick up on that compassion. Regardless of the bad days my dad had, of coming home being cranky, he lived to serve. And that was very clear from from the very beginning. I knew that he really loved and was very, very, very dedicated to his job. So I often want to highlight that respect factor and that compassion. And you do learn that as a child. You pick up on those things, right? When we would go out, and even if he wasn't on duty, he was on duty. I think a lot of you probably can relate to that. But always looking for anything that was out of ordinary, always trying to stay in a cop mode, I think, of making sure everyone was safe. And some of that, again, I think was a challenge for us as a child. Little things. I was thinking about this talk yesterday on my drive home, and I was remembering even just when we would go to a restaurant, he would have to have a certain chair. It would be so annoying because we wouldn't ever know why he was doing that. But he was making sure he could see all the exits and the doors and all those things. But as a kid, you're like, oh my gosh, Dad, like just pick a chair. Like, why can't I sit here? That kind of thing. But that overprotective kind of always on was, I think, a negative and a positive. And the negative being that he never really had, at least from my perspective, never really had that time where he could just like be him without being an officer. I think that was really hard for him whenever I was around, because again, he was in that protection mode. But then at the same time, I think it really took a toll on him, because imagine, I can only imagine myself being at work 24/7, even when I'm at home, sounds so stressful. But again, I think it was part of that ingrained, I have to be, constantly making sure everyone's safe. And how do you take that out? I don't know. So to this day, I never hold it against him, I guess, is for lack of a better term. But more so I'm trying to understand all of these things. And I think a piece of that always being on the job is that respect for the job, the integrity, and loving what he was doing and the compassion that he had for other people. So I also wanted to highlight a few things here, and this is kind of my way of saying, here's what I wish my dad and I talked about, or here are some things I wish my dad knew before he passed away. When he got sick, I was already in college. And so, when your kids go away to college, it just becomes a different type of relationship. I was only about an hour and a half away, but it felt like 7 hours. And I would come home maybe once in a while for holidays and things like that. But your relationship changes, right? And so we had gone from those teenage years where I was a little bit resentful that he was not home a lot in my earlier years. And now here's this guy who's trying to be in my life. And now he's always in a good mood. And he had not been that way before. And there was never a conversation about it. There was never any, my job, sometimes I come home, I just had a bad shift. I just need time. There was never any of that. And I think that would have been a huge, huge help because of that kind of understanding piece, right? We just want to understand, I think, from a kid's perspective. And this first point here, I think, is one of the most important that I wish I could have said to my dad. And if he was still here, I would definitely, this is the first thing I would say to him. It wasn't that you're a superhero in my eyes because you're invincible. It's because of the compassion. It's because of the fact that you chose a career to help other people and sacrificed Thanksgivings and my soccer games and all of these things to help others. That's why you're Batman, not because you come home and you're invincible. And I don't think that was ever clear, right? I think that was really hard for him because here's this little girl who thinks he's Batman. How is he supposed to come home and have a bad day? How is he supposed to come home and cry about a shift or be upset or even just not want to talk to me, right? That's hard, especially, I'm drawing these awful pictures that we still have saved of my dad. And he was always the Superman, right? A cape, police car in the background. And so you're kind of, as a kid, feeding into it in a way, not purposefully, but basically saying, my dad's invincible. And I think that he took that a little too personal, thinking that I didn't recognize that it's okay not to be okay. But I always like to follow up with this point. You are raising these kids, those characteristics I just listed. My dad instilled those into us: compassion, integrity, Right.
I had received feedback similarly from another couple who said, it's very interesting to hear the perspective of a child of a first responder raising a small child in a two-officer household. How our careers affect him is always a concern, and it's not always easy to find balance for everyone. I don't know what your thoughts are on that in terms of two-officer households, whereas your mom may have been a stable rock, when your dad was fluid, in terms of how he proceeded and behaved. Did your mom provide that for you? And then what could we do for two-officer households?
Yeah, I think, wow, what a challenge. What a lucky kid to grow up with two first responder parents. I think we might have said two children. I have a few comments to that. I think the first, your question about my mom, she definitely played a really key role. And I think that their relationship was what made our family stay together and get through a lot of the really difficult times. And I think it was more so her understanding of the job that helped our family and helped my dad. And again, I had mentioned that she was the daughter of a firefighter for 40 years, actually in the same city that my dad became a police officer. So lots of service in that city. But I think it was more so her understanding of, it's not just a one day thing. It's not you have a bad day and that's like the next day everything will be fine. It just takes a toll on you like anything else, like any other job, right? But it's exacerbated by I just went on my first ride along actually this summer with an incredible officer. And gosh, like in that 12-hour night shift felt like, wow, these people are superheroes because of all of the stuff that you can take in one shift. People yelling at you, all these different things. And I'm not just speaking for police officers, first responders. And I think that, you changed since you got on the job would be really helpful in this sense of being invincible. And I think a lot of that comes from this sense of here's my kid who thinks so highly of me. I don't know how to necessarily discuss this now. And it's not like you're given a toolbox or this great rule book on what to share and what not. And I think age has a lot to do with it too, right? When I was a young kid, that was some of the hardest moments he was going through on the job. He had gone through horrible incidents and just kind of the stressors of moving up the ranks and things like that. And I think as a child of a first responder, it's then so hard again to kind of understand what level of openness is really important and going to be the most effective. And like I said, I think it's so critical as the child of a first responder to really recognize it's not like you're given a book. It's kind of like when you take us home from the hospital, it's not like you get this grand, uh, binder that's all color coded with this is what you do when you have this type of experience. It's all kind of learn as you go. And I think the more we're able to talk about it as kids of first responders and talk about our perspective and how some of the things that go on after the job and when you do come home from work that we do recognize, I think is really important. And I hope that, in my discussion, it kind of shined through that above anything else, I just wanted my dad to know it's okay. And it was never a conversation we ever had. And I wish that we did. And he was never the guy who was super emotional, regardless of if he was going through something. So for me, I knew I was never going to have like those huge open discussions, and that's okay. But there could have been other things that he could have done that I think would have been really helpful for me. And one of them was just kind of explaining like, hey, I had a bad day at work. It was okay for my mom to have a bad day at work. She was a teacher. It was okay for me to have a bad day at school. But it was never okay for dad not to have a good day. I never really heard him say, I just had a really rough call or today just stunk, like there was never those comments, but it was all okay for us to have that. And so that's something that I think is really impactful and powerful when you think about families who are just kind of starting out or are just getting on the job and not understanding, it's okay to have a bad day. Everyone does. And my dad would tell me that all the time, right? Like not every day is going to rock. Well, then the same for you, right? It's okay that you had a bad shift. And I think right before, before I lost all of you, I was trying to say, you raise these children, including myself, to be understanding. No cop's kid or firefighter, EMS, dispatcher, none of those children will ever walk out of, that parent relationship without compassion, without caring for other people. It's engraved in us, that's part of who we are because of the people that raised us. So we would have that same compassion for you. And again, that's something that I wish I had talked about or wish I had said. I have that compassion because you made me compassionate. So it's okay that you had a crappy shift, really awful happened, and you just need 30 minutes or an hour in the bedroom, in your office, wherever, away from us. That's okay. And I think that was hard for him. He had like probably a 20-minute drive home from work. So he had a little bit of time. But coming in that door, I mean, I can just remember, Dad, I have a question about this homework thing, or, you have to bring Erin to soccer, or whatever it was like hitting the ground running again after he had just gone through, a 12-hour shift, seeing whatever he saw. And it could have been different every day, but now it's time for soccer practice and I'm late, Dad, let's go, and I think that shift could have been better if there was a level of openness about, I just need 30 minutes. My dad loved to work out. And I think some of that time that he would work out after work instead of coming right home was to benefit him, but also us. Taking that time and taking that space, everyone does it as a human being, and it should be no different. In fact, first responders should more time physiologically, right? We can get into that whole aspect. That could be a whole different talk, but it's not natural to come from that hypervigilance state of 12-hour shift and then go to soccer practice and be rushing to that and have it be normal. And so I think that level of openness is so key, and something that I wish that my family had a little bit more of, to really kind of support my dad, but also to benefit our relationship. Like I said at the beginning, we were so close, loved my dad. He's a great, great person. Learned so much from him. But there were pieces of tension in our relationship that really were centered around how he would act when he got home from work. And I think that it could have been a lot better. And by the time, he became captain and was ready to retire, he got sick. And so we didn't ever have that time in our life where we were able to be that open. And so that's why I think it's so important too, to tell this particular story, because I'm hoping that it will give you some kind of sense of, this is how my child sees it. Again, I'm not everyone's kid, and I know everyone's kid is going to be different, but from the perspective of a first responder's child, I can tell you, okay to take the time in the space, that you're not a hero because you're invincible. It's more so, we love you and value everything that you stand for as a first responder. And a piece of that is recognizing, how to problem solve. And I think my dad had kind of this, I don't want to say negative view, but was kind of standoffish whenever we would say things like therapy or go see a mental health provider. And I think that was hard from him because he didn't see it as like a quick fix. But one of the things I think he could have done that would have been a great fix for our family was to have that level of openness. Hey, I need this time. I need a little bit of space. I'll play with you in the backyard in an hour, that kind of thing, versus coming home, ignoring me, and then I'm pissed, for lack of a better term. I'm annoyed that he wasn't super friendly or that he's taking it out on me. So I think all of those things come in time, and it's going to look completely different for everyone. I never want anyone to think that I'm saying this is exactly how it should go. More so coming from a place that lost my dad really young. These are things that I think could have really benefited our relationship. More so how parents can frame it, making that connection with your kid to say, I've been in this job for 37 years and nothing has changed, or whatever language you want to use. But it's all about framing too, for your kid to kind of understand and connect. I think understanding that this is like a compounding stress that goes on over time, and that support is needed not just once. It's a partnership. And I think for my dad, it was more, he wanted to keep me innocent and not know about any of the bad, which, I did realize some of the bad when I became a grown-up. But I think for him, it is, let me protect my kid the best I can from ever seeing the horrible things that I see at work, because I never want like to experience that. And I think that's a lot of why he didn't talk about specific calls or had a bad day. I don't think he wanted us to know about the bad in the world. A lot of the times too, when I had given those examples of difficulty in terms of, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm expecting the mailman's here now. When, I talked about those difficult times where I just didn't understand, she was a big part of explaining that for me. And so I think having that double first responder relationship is really key because they'll understand it more. In the world, I think he saw such horrible things, and I forgot this, but when he passed away, we were things and kind of going through stuff, and he has this huge that he literally kept under the bed of all of the paper, all of the people he saved, all of these things. And it was so symbolic in that moment of, now I'm in my 20s, and I remember pulling it out from under the bed, and it was like he had kept all of this in a binder, literally under his bed, as if he wanted it packed away from his family. And so I think that caused more stress and strain on him. And also I had a lot of questions. I think when you ask that about when to talk about it, I think it's when your kids have questions, instead of giving a really vague answer or about it, talking about it in a way that you're comfortable with. If I have a question about, I remember this instance, I saw my dad on the paper. He had rescued one child, and the rest of the family unfortunately died, and it was horrible. It was on the 4th of July. And, he'd come home from it. We had a huge 4th of July party. So imagine now you have just seen a family die. He was the first on the scene. He comes back and we're having a 4th of July party. I mean, to shift from that mindset, and he, just not there, like I described, right? Like kind of that magic chair sense. And I remember asking him specifically, like, what's up? We have this family party. Everyone's here. Like, what's on? And maybe in that moment, he couldn't tell me because it was too hard, but that would have been a good time to explain, like, just so you know, I go through real things at work and see really awful things, and it's hard for me to shift. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but maybe just think it when it comes up versus that uncomfortability of like, do I sit down with my kid and have a conversation? Maybe it's just addressing their questions. Part of being a first responder and the personality traits of a first responder is always thinking about other people first. And I think as a kid, I carry some of that guilt thinking, gosh, that's part of our family's job to say, Dad, it's okay. And that's something that I think if anybody's listening that's a child of a first responder, it's a simple phrase, but it goes a long way. And they get it because they're a first responder who tells that to other people.
What would you suggest to a parent whose work is first responder as a police officer, how to strike that balance of not expecting perfection or the very best from their own children? Because, type A personality, people usually have perfectionism attached to it, right? And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love this question. I think my dad did a really good job of this. I'll give you even an example of myself. Curfew, right? When you're 16, just get your license. Curfew's huge. It's everything. Be home at this time. And my dad was really good about explaining things. So it wouldn't just be do this because I said so. He always provided an explanation, and that helped me make decisions on my own. So I'm a very independent girl. My sister is people who just loves the rule book and she'll follow it to a T, right? I like to make my own decisions, but I never wanted to disappoint my parents. Like that would be the worst thing in the world because of that integrity piece, right? I talked about how that's so huge with my dad. And so for me, it was so critical to kind of, I'm so sorry.
You're fine.
These dogs, goodness. It was so important for me not to disappoint my parents. So instead, my dad would take the approach of explaining why certain rules were there, explaining why it was important to act a certain way. I think the word balance is so perfect, right? Not just expecting that they're so perfect to a T, but kind of explaining why it's important to follow certain things. And I'm not sure if the question is meaning necessarily like following the rules, doing all those types of things, right? But my dad would into me why curfew was important, right? Like not just that it was, but here's why you shouldn't be on the road at this time, or He would do something he did do that I think was really, really helpful was show us, kind of that drug and alcohol talk, right? Instead of just saying like, absolutely don't do it, like it's so bad for you, right? The typical language. It was him bringing us down to the city he worked at and showing us what could happen if we take that route. And that was a really kind of drastic way, but it perfect way because it wasn't that I was more of the child who wanted to make the decision on my own. He gave me tools to assess what it meant to do the right thing. And that's why I love that word integrity, because it wasn't just do it because my dad, it was here's why these things are in place. Here's why you should make this right decision. And I think that was really powerful. And it's something I carry with me. I'm now 28 years old and I still think of those things. Doing the right thing and making sure I'm explaining things even to, younger cousins or things like that. Like having that power behind the expectation is this because I want you to be here, not because I want you to be perfect, but because I want the best for you. So I'm not sure, Jean, if that answers your question at all. But I think definitely it's a balance between having the expectation, but having that conversation, explaining why, right? If you're a police officer and you know these things are in place, never touch alcohol or drugs, to us the background of it. For me, that was really, really helpful. I love to talk about this type of thing, this type of work, love to share my story. And I'm hoping to dedicate the rest of my life to do this type of research to help future families, future first responders, because I have such a privilege of growing up that way. So I'm so grateful for everyone's time today. I will put my email address in the chat. Oh, there it is. If you ever want to contact me, again, I'm so passionate about this type of work and I'm so in awe of everything that anyone does on this call in terms of first responder work. And that includes all different types of first responders. I'm just so grateful. Please reach out to me if you have questions, comments, anything. I'm constantly doing research on this type of this type of work. And I think the voices of all of you are the important part of making a change. So thank you for having me on and for listening to me. I really appreciate it. I'll just wrap up with this last sentence. You're not our hero because you're invincible. You're our hero because of who you are. So thank you to all of the parents, first responders out here. I really appreciate you guys. Thank you.